And instead of just paraphrasing this very important medical document from the 18th century, I just wanted to read and take some time, not just reading, but also commenting. And maybe you guys, whenever it's on your heart, you can, interrupt me, stop me, and maybe say something that you feel like worthy of commenting. The first, they're both in the articles written about the supposed case of vampirism in Serbia, where I'm from, coming in the 18th century, and both of these articles are complementing each other. And again, you guys can stop me at any time and speak your mind. The first article comes from Magia Posthuma, blogspot.com, and I'll post links to both of the articles in the in the video's description. And the first is titled Visum et Repertum, which is Latin, and soon we'll hear what it means. It says that one of the most important sources for the history of vampirism is the report Visum et Repertum, written and attested by military surgeons in Serbia on January 26, 1732. Just to give context, my people were attacked and enslaved and occupied first by the Ottoman Turkish Empire, and then from one side, and then later from the Austrians, which were invading us from the other side. This report, the medical report, when the Austrian governing authorities sent a medical team in Serbia to investigate these strange reports of deceased people who are supposedly being resurrected, quote unquote, and being attacking local people. So this report was sent to the authorities in Belgrade, the capital of Serbia, and Vienna, the capital of Austria, and copied by envoys of foreign governments. Foremost, it was distributed in various versions to newspapers and scientific periodicals throughout Europe, causing a public as well as scientific sensation in many European countries throughout the year 1732. So I just want to say something. This was not just a rumor. This was a medical team who are not Serbs. They didn't like Serbs. They just occupied, the ancient Serbs, my people, my country, and they had no reason to be on the side of locals. They would think this is superstition, but they actually went and put their honest opinion when it comes to this. So this is very interesting. In fact, had it not been for this report, the word vampire, which is the only Serbian word recognized in the whole world. So when you say vampire, it comes from Serbian word vampir. So had it not been for this report, the word vampire and the stories of these supposedly blood-drinking corpses would probably not have been known, and consequently, the popular vampire of authors like John William Polidori and Bram Stoker, as well as the vampire of the 20th and 21st century popular media, would not have come into existence. A copy of the original manuscript is stored in the archives in Vienna. So again, it's a very official document. It's not a forgery. It's not some conspiracy. But the text is mostly known in somewhat different versions throughout various printed sources. I will skip some of the text and go further. Having defeated the Ottomans, the Habsburg Austrians entered a treaty with the Ottoman Empire in Požarevac, one of the towns in southeast of Serbia, in 1718, whereby parts of present-day Romania, part of Bosnia, and the northern part of Serbia came under Austrian rule. These areas that had not recently become occupied were put under military jurisdiction. The occupied areas in Serbia acted as an enlargement of the so-called, this is a super long German word, Militargrenze, probably mispronounced, which is the military border, which was a buffer zone between the Habsburg and the Ottoman empires. The zone was not only a buffer zone against the military attacks, but also against epidemic diseases, very important detail, which had ravaged parts of Europe for centuries. In 1679, the plague had cost Vienna about 1/3 or 1/4 of its population, and as late as 1713, there had been a minor epidemic in Vienna. Epidemics were known to occur in the Ottoman Empire from time to time, and consequently, it was necessary to stay aware of cases of epidemic deaths. So Austrian officials, like military surgeons, had good reason to be very cautious towards signs of inexplicable deaths. This all serves as a wonderful introduction when it comes to what was happening in south side of my country, right? Again, this is the beginning of 18th century. One case was reported to the commander of the Imperial Army in Jagodina, another town in Serbia, to the Colonel Lieutenant Schnetzer by inhabitants of Serbian village Medveđa. This is actually not super far from my hometown. Very interesting. In the fall of 1731, along with the local militia, the so-called Haiduks. I have to explain who Haiduks. So Haiduks, you can see them as former freedom fighters by the Ottomans, by the Turkish Empire. They were, of course, seen as something bad, like, look at these outlaws. But no, they're just wanting to set the country free. Along with the local militia, the so-called Haiduks, right, the Serbian freedom fighters, they complained of several mysterious deaths. Schnetzer consequently sent a contagious medicus, a doctor called Glazer, very important, to Medveđa, the small town, to investigate what had happened. Glazer arrived in Medveđa on December 12th, 1731. Ooh, maybe we should have done this episode on December 12th, just for fun. Although he found symptoms from malnutrition caused by the fasting of the Orthodox villagers. Man, kudos to them, right? In the midst of war, they were fasting. They wanted some spiritual breakthrough and to be God to set them free from all these people who came to enslave us. He found no evidence of any epidemic disease. The villagers, however, claimed that symptoms like fever were the cause of the deaths of 13 villagers who had died within the past 6 weeks. Now it's getting super interesting. They believed that the deaths were caused by bloodsuckers or vampires, which had been common among the Ottoman Turks. Okay, so we can already see something spiritual happening here. And this was not the first case of vampirism in the world, of course, not just in the world, but also on the border between Europe and Asia. It could be that something spiritual, something nasty and demonic came from the Turks. So I think this detail is important. So Ottoman Turks already had cases like this, and then it started happening in Serbia by the end of their occupation of Serbia. Dr. Glazer could not persuade the villagers from believing this. In fact, they claimed that they would have to move somewhere else if the authorities would not execute the vampires. Consequently, Glazer had 10 graves opened to carry out an autopsy of the corpses. Some of the bodies had decomposed, but others had become bloated and bloody with fresh blood flowing from nose and mouth. Again, these were dead corpses that these people didn't die just yesterday. These were like relatively old corpses, still looking fresh. For this reason, Glazer found it impossible to persuade the villagers from believing that the corpses had become vampires. In his report to the authorities, he asked for permission for the corpses to be executed so the people could be calm. So he slowly started this change of mind and change of heart, right? Glazer's report was sent to the commander in Belgrade, who apparently decided to send a commission to investigate the matter anew. This commission was led by the regimental surgeon Johann Flukinger, I'm giving my best, who arrived in Medveđa on January 7th. This is so funny because in Serbian Orthodox calendar, January 7th is Christmas. So they arrived in Medveđa on January 7th, 1732. They interviewed the villagers who said that a Hajduk, again, freedom fighter, called Arnaut Pavle, it says here Paul. So Pavle is Paul. So Paul, my friend, your name in Serbian is Pavle. So that Arnaut Paul or Pavle had died in 1727 from a fall from a hay wagon. While alive, Paul had often told that he had been harassed by a vampire when he was in another part of Serbia. To rid himself of the vampire, he had eaten soil from its grave and rubbed himself with its blood. But after some 20 or 30 days after his death, some of the villagers had complained of being haunted by Paul, who had become a vampire. Paul, I hope you won't become vampire after wearing that mask for tonight, brother. I hope you won't be harassing someone tonight. Okay. 4 villagers were claimed to having been killed by him, by Paul, right? To rid themselves of the vampire, the villagers opened his grave 40 days after his interment and found his body uncorrupted. That's insane. Fresh blood was flowing from his ears, eyes, mouth, and nose, and his clothing, and the whole coffin was bloody because the guy just ate his flesh. According to the villagers, these were signs that he was a vampire, and they consequently drove a stake through his heart, which made his corpse groan and bleed. I don't know how to pronounce this word. Copiously, I don't know, but probably extensively. Yeah, thank you. Finally, the body was burned and the ashes buried in his grave. As the villagers believed that everyone killed by a vampire could become vampires themselves, they also dug up the corpses of the 4 people who had allegedly been killed by Paul and treated them in the same fashion as they had Paul. Still, as Paul had also sucked the blood of cattle. That's insane also. The people who had eaten the flesh of those animals also risked becoming vampires. So this was both a visible and a spiritual, well, if I can, not just visible, this was both a materialistic and spiritual epidemic, if I can put it that way. During 3 months in late 1731 and early 1732, 17 villagers, young as well as old, had died. Some of them had become ill suddenly and had died after 2 or 3 days of illness. The daughter-in-law of Hajduk Stanoika had lain down to sleep healthy, but woke up with a terrible scream at midnight, frightened and shaking, complaining that she has been suffocated by Miloe, a man who had died 9 weeks before. She then got a strong pain in her chest and got worse and worse until she died after 3 days. By the way, guys, do you think I should be reading horror stories with my accent? Am I doing okay? Like horror stories for kids. Okay. The villagers told this on January 7th, 1732, to the commission consisting of Austrian military officials, including 2 subordinate medical officers. After interrogating the villagers, the commission went to the cemetery, exhumed and examined the 17 corpses. The minority of the 17 corpses had corrupted, whereas most of them were found in a to all appearances incorruptible state with fresh blood within the body. Man, and this is more than a folk tale. Like, this was recorded by scientists, by doctors. That's absolutely bizarre. This was the case of the 60-year-old woman called Milica, who was believed to be the cause of the deaths because she had eaten the flesh of sheep. It doesn't say sheep, it says sheeps. So it's not me, it's not my English, which had been killed by a vampire. She had died after 3 months of illness and had been buried 3 months previously. Although she had all her life been skinny, much to the amazement of the villagers, her exhumed body was fattish. Man, they served her well in her afterlife. In the cavity of her chest, fluid blood was found and the intestines were uncorrupted. The above-mentioned Stanoika was 18 days after her burial, found with a ruddy and lifelike face. Under her right ear was found a blue bruise of a finger. A quantity, I think this is a misspelled word, probably a quantity of fresh blood flowed from her nose when she was taken out of her grave, and fluid blood was found in her chest and heart. All the intestines, the subcutis, I don't know how to, this is some medical word, and her nails. Okay, thank you. And her nails were fresh. After the examination of the bodies, the corrupted bodies were replaced into their graves, while the rest of the bodies were decapitated and burned by local gypsies. Finally, the ashes were thrown into the river Morava, where my dad went to fish so many times. I hope the fish he caught and which we ate were not polluted. Otherwise, one of these nights, I don't know what can happen to me. Okay, let's go. On January 26, 1732, the medical officers of the commission described their findings and acts in the report Visum et Repertum, which is the title of this article, which means, translated in English, seen and found, and sent it to the authorities in Belgrade, who forwarded the same article to the War Council at the court in Vienna, along with a request for remuneration of Flankinger and his two colleagues. The council dealt with the matter on February 11th, but more correspondence was necessary before Flankinger and his fellow officers received their remuneration in November 1732. By the way, I love all these, even though I have some troubles pronouncing their last names. I love all the dates, all the name of towns, officers, doctors, because it gives so much credibility to the whole article, to the whole story. In the meantime, however, the report had been reprinted in various newspapers and journals, causing a large-scale debate in certain parts of Europe. Yeah, it was causing all kinds of talk, and I think then some type of hysteria and folk tales start getting expanded in the rest of Europe after this report came to Belgrade and Vienna. As early as the very day that the Visum et Repertum was signed, which was January 26, 1732, a standard bearer serving in Serbia, von Kottwitz, another Austrian, wrote a letter from Belgrade to Professor Michael Ernst at Müller in Leipzig, that's Germany, asking for an explanation of the phenomena observed. Glaser himself tried to attract some attention to his experiences by first sending a copy of his report to the Collegium Sanitatis in Vienna, and later to his father, Johann Friedrich Glaser. Glaser Sr. wrote about it to one of the editors of the scientific journal Commerci Libertari et Rei Medicae et Scientiae Naturalis Incrementum Institute. Man, that was like the longest scientific journal name in the history, right? Which was published in Nuremberg, right? So that's Germany again. His letter was published in Latin in the journal on March 22nd, 1732, and caused a debate on vampires in that journal, which lasted for the rest of the year. Meanwhile, Karl Alexander, Prince of Württemberg, who had been in charge of Serbia and Belgrade, was traveling to the court of King Friedrich Wilhelm I of Prussia in Berlin. Apparently, they discussed the Visum et Repertum because the king asked the Royal Prussian Society of Sciences to state a verdict on the contents of the report. So this was getting all the way to the upper level. It can go higher than the king and the Royal Society of Scientists and Doctors. The society convened on March 7th and finished a statement on the vampires or bloodsuckers on March 11th, in which they stated that all the phenomena that had been observed on the examined corpses could be explained by well-known natural processes, particularly in Leipzig, but also in other places. However, the matter of vampires and how one were to explain the apparent incorruptibility of the corpses, the illness of the victims, and the claims concerning being haunted by vampires were debated in numerous books and journals. Later on, the vampire case from Medvedja was retold numerous times. The names of persons and places were changed along the way. So sometimes Arnold Paul became, e.g., Arnold Paule or Arnold Paul. So his name was changing from story to story or from region to region, which is normal because, again, we're dealing with Serbian, right? So his name had to be more naturalized to other countries. The same thing we say Jesus as Jesus, or in my country, Jesus, right? This is normal. In the middle of the 19th century, Herbert Mayo decided to try to use, quote unquote, the romancing vein to try to restore the original colors of the picture. For example, he dramatized the story when he recounted it in his letters on the truths contained in modern superstitions that were first published in Blackwood's Edinburgh magazine. I'm almost done. It is this version that is more or less used by Dudley Wright and Montague Summers. I have one or two books from Montague Summers. He was a Christian priest who was examining, researching, and writing on different type of supernatural phenomena. And I hope one day to find a person who may not be an expert on Montag Summers' writings, but at least who is eloquent enough to speak with me on these issues. I would love that. So it is this version that is more or less used by Dudley Wright and Montag Summers. And it is amazing to find that the original colors of the pictures, so to speak, quote unquote, include a story of doomed love between Arnold, Paul, or Pavle, and his neighbor, Nina. Curiously, we're even told that it was on a gray morning in early August that a commission visited the cemetery in Medvedja, although we know it actually happened in January. So people were changing some dates to make it more interesting, just maybe in the same fashion we tell stories which we heard from our grandparents, we tell them to our kids with some maybe slightly change details to make it more interesting. Again, makes sense. The tradition of mixing up fact and fiction when it comes to vampires apparently is far from new. I think this is well enough, and it was long enough to give you maybe not this creepy sensation of supposed vampirism happening in the 18th century Serbia, but at least gives this, at least for me, very important layer how not the locals, you can say, yeah, they're just, illiterate, superstitious villagers, and maybe they were. But we have officials, governing officials from Austria, who had nothing in common with Serbs, and they're like medically and scientifically trained. So the top of the top, the cream of the elite, people came to investigate, and they report how they observe all these bodies, all these corpses, bloody, intact, sometimes weeks, if not months after their burial, and they looked like they were just buried 5 minutes ago. Sometimes even their parts of their faces would be, having blood, because those corpses were reported as if they just ate, they just sucked someone's blood. So I know there's a lot of explicit details, but I find this story fascinating, not just as a Serb, but as someone who is interested to learn more when it comes to reconciling religion and all these spiritual phenomena.